If you could create the lifestyle that you've always dreamed about, if you could forge a future that you've always wanted, but you didn't know how to get there, would you do it? In this episode of Unbeatable, you get a chance to hear not only a guy who did that for himself, but he's helping many other people do it right now. I'm excited to bring you this episode with Jamin Heppell, a guy who helped found mountains and marathons, creating leaders and giving them experiences that they'll talk about for the rest of their life on this episode of Unbeatable.
These stories of triumph over adversity will help you handle your toughest days in life and become unbeatable.
Hey, Jamin, thanks for taking a break in your whirlwind tour and joining me from Mexico for this episode of Unbeatable.
So good. Really excited to be here, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man, I have heard a lot about you. In fact, as I read about you, I was like, man, I wish I had this guy's lifestyle, because what he's doing right now, I could totally see myself doing.
Yeah, look, from what I know of you too, Jeff, I reckon this would be right up your alley, but I live a very blessed, very privileged life, but certainly not by accident. It's lifestyle by design.
Well, we're going to spend some time talking about two of my favorite subjects in the world. Like, you've got two of my three favorite subjects in the world, mountains and leadership. And you get a chance to do that every day, all day long. Literally, like, I could do that for the rest of my life and be a very happy guy.
So good, man. Well, I'm excited to dive in.
Yeah. Tell me how things got started for you. So let's go back to your childhood. Would you describe a little bit of growing up, where you grew up? Talk a little bit about mom and dad and what life was like for you growing up.
Yeah, sure. So if you haven't picked up already, I'm from Australia. So I grew up
down in the southern part of the United States. We would say you ain't from around here, Jamin.
That's accurate. So I ain't from around here based on that geographic context. So no, I grew up in country Victoria, so the most southeastern state of mainland Australia. And I grew up in a little country town of about 7,000 people. Mum and dad grew up in a relatively nuclear family, sort of middle class family. Mum and dad, they were both local athletes. And so as I grew up, sport and physical health and well-being was a big part of our world. And so particularly through my dad, that was very much instilled as a core part of my life. And I'm the eldest of three boys. And so we grew up in a tremendously, ridiculously competitive household.
Yeah, I can only imagine. You guys competed at everything, even the food at the dinner table, right?
Bingo, that was exactly how it worked. In fact, there's a thing, we all learned to eat really quick because mum would only make enough seconds for one person. And so we learned that if you ate fastest, you were the one who got seconds. So
nice.
That was the kind of energy that we grew up in. And, for me as the eldest of three boys, I guess a traditionally quite masculine father. As a kid growing up, unconsciously, all I ever wanted to do was seek my dad's approval and have my dad's validation. So a lot of obviously there's shadows to that, but then the goal from that was I became a high performer. And so naturally I gravitated towards leadership, whether that was in school or whether that was in sporting clubs, and was always driven to be the best. In some cases, potentially to an unhealthy level, like it was like,
I was going to say that can be great, but that can also be terrible, man.
There can be it's the shadow side of it. And so, in a way, like as a result of, being someone who aspired to high performance and doing my best at everything that I did, naturally that was obviously then socially validated by my parents' friends, by my teachers, by my coaches. So there was all of the social encouragement to continue down that path. However, and I'll probably get to this later in my story, the shadow side or the dark side of that is that we can overwork, or we can I can overwork and I can overcommit myself and sacrifice my own needs in service to others or in service to validation. So nonetheless, my parents were incredibly beautiful influences on my childhood. I had a very secure upbringing. As a kid growing up, all I ever wanted to do was be a professional athlete, particularly Australian in the Australian Football League, so Aussie rules football, which is a little different to NFL, a little different to rugby. Yeah. It's kind of a merger of basketball, NFL, and rugby altogether, really. And that was a sport I really wanted to play. And unfortunately, at the age of 10, I had my first knee arthroscope. I tore cartilage in my knee at the age of...
At 10 years old?
At 10 years old, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I wasn't set off to the best athletic path quite early on. But then at 16, I tore cartilage again in my right knee. Then 6 weeks later, tore cartilage in my left knee. Then
Oh
it was
man, yeah, might as well do them both if you're going to
doing,
go all out, right?
we're going all out, exactly, man. So what happened was I actually had a condition in my knees called osteochondritis dissecans, which effectively was just a weakness in the cartilage that happens to, it's a rare condition that happens to active teenage boys. So I spent a lot of my teenage years on crutches, navigating injury.
Oh, that would be devastating for a kid who's very athletic and when you grew up, basically being outdoors all day long. That would be devastating.
Bingo, country kid, like that's all we did. We were just outdoors. So in that, it was both obviously a challenge, but then also there was resilience that came with that. And, around the age of 16, that was when I started to recognize that the pursuit of a professional sporting career was probably not going to be my trajectory.
When you've racking up those kind of surgeries before you're 16, it's going to be hard to pursue professional sports that way.
That's right. But nonetheless, the desire to be an athlete has always remained, and I'll speak a little bit more about that later. But, so I cultivated both, I took those blows, but in turn also cultivated resilience and perspective around how else I might want to be contributing to the world and what I really want to do. And so as I continued to get older, there was two themes that were always running concurrently in my life as I retrospectively look back, and that was leadership and sport. And so, it was around the age of 16 when I started to really double down on my leadership development, my public speaking skills, my debating skills, my critical inquiry skills. And it was around that time when I was at the local football club, and I had just been invited to play for the senior football team. And so
all right.
I was starting
pretty big deal right there.
Yeah, a big deal for a 16-year-old, starting to play with and against and train with the men. And I remember I just started dating a beautiful woman named Liana, and she was also 16 years old, and she was quite aesthetically gorgeous, and that was well known around the community. And so I turned up to football training, and a few of the older guys were pretty keen to talk to me about that, and in a way their language was quite derogatory. It was quite as they described the language, like toxic masculine. I won't use the exact verbiage they use, but it was quite confronting for me as a 16-year-old to to receive that. And then also what I noticed beyond that culture was also a subtle drug taking culture of illicit drugs within the football club culture. And something about me just didn't vibe. It was just like, wow, sport brings such magic to grassroots communities.
Yeah,
but
sure.
What's perpetuating here just doesn't land for me. It's not aligned with my values. And I guess at the time I wouldn't have had language for it like that, but something was just feeling a bit off, and I knew I knew I wanted to do something about it. So it was then a couple of years later when I was school captain of my local school, I got invited to be a part of a 6-day leadership development program run by YMCA Victoria. I believe the YMCA have quite a big influence in the US. And I was invited onto this 6-day transformational leadership retreat where it brought together 60 young leaders from all across the state to be immersed in a week-long experience of personal development and looking at our vision for the world, looking at our strengths, weaknesses, optimism, pessimism, just all of these baseline concepts of personal growth and development. And I found myself more at home than I'd ever been before. And being in a conversation, it was, for me, it was also the first time I'd been taken out of my little bubble of Leongatha, a little town, and brought into a space where I was introduced to cultural diversity and people coming from all different ethnic backgrounds, racial backgrounds, different religious backgrounds. And all of a sudden my world just got opened. And in that week, a couple of things happened, but one of the key things was I recognized that what those facilitators had created for me and the depth of safety and permission that had been created in that week, I knew that I was going to do that for other people, and I was going to do that professionally and for the rest of my life. So at the time, 17 years old, I look back at it, and one of the things that I see as quite instrumental in my journey was getting connected to a really deep sense of purpose quite young. And obviously there's much more that I could share, but that sort of brings me to young adulthood, I guess.
Yeah. Where did this leadership start for you? I mean, by the time that you're playing sports, actually being the oldest of 4 boys, it probably started pretty young for you. But mom and dad played sports. What sports did they do?
So they played. So dad was he was a local athlete, and his specialty was Aussie rules. So Australian football.
All right.
For American listeners, I highly recommend go to YouTube, type in Aussie rules explained, and watch the 5-minute YouTube video that comes up the top. This sport will blow your mind if you've never heard of it.
And mom, what sport did she participate in?
And so she played netball, which is a sport that stems, again, it's not that popular in the US, but it stems from the UK. In the early 1900s, netball was created as the women's equivalent of basketball because women weren't allowed to play basketball back in the early 1900s, so they created a women's version of basketball. Again, a brilliant sport that's predominantly still played by women in Australia, and it's a global sport, but it hasn't quite picked up in the US yet.
Yeah. So did mom and dad start to notice, how did this leadership start to develop in you? Was that mom and dad doing that, or where did that come from?
Yeah, it's a great question. And mom and dad, they debate around this because they don't know. But what I will say is that if I look at Olma and Olpas, and my mum's parents are Dutch, they were both huge into community development and played a significant role in their volunteer contributions to the local church and were constantly involved in the community. Then my dad, he was a playing coach of the football when he was younger, and then he moved into coaching junior football. So when I was a kid growing up, my dad was always kind of like the guy leading me and all of my mates.
Yeah.
And then my mum would be team manager. So it wasn't necessarily like they were politicians or like they were, leading, that they were directors on non-profit boards or anything like that. But I suppose the way in which I saw my grandparents be in the community, the way I experienced my parents just show up in service to grassroots sport, I suppose there were certainly these layers of leadership that were being exuded. And at the same time, I think there was also the messaging of like whatever my ideals were around masculinity, the idea of being out the front and being confident and being able to, curate like a group. All of that was probably subconsciously being programmed in my mind of like what it meant for me to be a healthy young man, even when I was like, 6 or 7 years old, watching football and reading magazines and stuff.
Well, I'm trying to get at the question, was somebody pushing you? Did mom and dad push you out to the forefront? And I use out on purpose because leading means that you're out in front. Did they kind of push that, or did you notice that inside of you? Did others around you notice that and start to pull you in that arena? And Jamin, here's why I'm asking you this question. You may not know this, but I teach leadership. I love leadership. Man, this is the topic I could spend the next 7 hours talking about. And when I'm teaching this subject, teaching the introduction level courses on this, I love to have a conversation with my students about leaders and ask, are leaders born that way, or are they built that way? Meaning, was it your family? Was it your environment? Did you get the leadership gene when you were born? Was it the house that you were raised in, or was it both? And I can work people in knots on this question, because as soon as somebody says it's definitely one, I'll give them the opposite side, and they're like, wait, maybe it's the other. And then pretty soon they're all sitting there scratching their heads. So were you born that way? Were you built that way? Or is it both?
I follow. Leadership is certainly something intuitive to me. Whether, I have always gravitated towards leadership roles and have always felt most comfortable when I've been in the role, and be that a leader out the front or behind. I've always had that inner knowingness of like, born to lead in a way. And it's interesting because I would never have actually ever phrased it that way, but the amount of feedback that I've received from people across the course of the last couple of decades is like a lot of like, you are a natural leader. So there is the genetic, there is like a nature component for me. Mm-hmm. However, then I have said yes and worked tirelessly inside the commitment to like being the best expression of myself in the world. Yeah. And that just happens to be aligned with my passion, which is leadership and transformation.
Yeah. So when I have this conversation with students in the classroom, you're saying right now exactly what I try to say to them. There are some people that are natural born leaders. And I use the language you just used. If you go to a locker room, any school locker room, somebody in that locker room is a leader. I tell my students, almost everybody in the locker room knows who the leader is, and they may not have the title leader, meaning captain of the team,
Yep.
but everybody behind closed doors knows who the leader is.
Yep.
And it's usually a bit of both, right?
Yep.
There's something natural inside of you that makes you a leader, but then there's also you work at it, your environment created it.
Yep.
And I can't help but think if you're invited to spend 6 weeks studying leadership, if you're invited to spend 6 days studying leadership with some of the greatest leaders in your state at your age, well, obviously people around you are taking notice. This kid can lead.
Totally. And that's beautifully said. And there are two things to that, because I think one is off the back of that 6-day experience, the coordinator of the program circled back a week later and said, hey, we'd like to invite you to be a facilitator on next year's program. So there was obviously inside of that.
Wow, they're bringing you back next year. You're standing out that much.
Yeah. So there was an impression that was left, and it's important that I speak into that, because if I look at the trajectory of what had me continue to step into new skills, realms, levels of leadership and confidence, it really was like those who are ahead of me seeing the potential.
Yeah, seeing something in you.
But also seeing the drive. Because again, I'm sure everyone can relate to this, of like seeing the kid with the potential and then giving the kid all the opportunity. But at the end of the day, if the kid doesn't grab it,
yeah, they don't want it.
They don't want it. And it's just like, and I could count, there's like 5 specific individuals I could think from my teenage years where I look at and going, forth, man, like had you applied yourself, like who knows what would have been possible for you. But this is part of it. It's about being in touch with our genius, in touch with our gifts, and then consciously cultivating the skills that complement that specific, that specific genius, and saying yes to the opportunities that present themselves. And so this is an example of that for me, where, people continue to be in touch with my potential. And then also I had the drive that was willing to say yes and take advantage to continue to, step down the rungs.
Well, there's one more question I'm dying to know before we go on. My wife has talked for a long time about taking a trip to Australia. She has wanted to go for many years. Mm-hmm. I would love to go. Neither one of us have ever been to your continent. Mm-hmm. So you got to tell us what life was like as a boy out there in the small town in rural Australia, because from what I've seen, it looks like it could be amazing.
Well, mate, as long as you don't confront an animal that could kill you, which is very likely.
Important safety note: don't get in a fight with an animal that can kill you.
That's right. And so kangaroos, we do ride them to school, and those drop bears, you've got to make sure that they don't fall on you when you're camping. People say, so does everything kill you in Australia? And I'm like, well, mate, why do you reckon I got out? Why do you reckon I've been traveling for?
Yeah, that's right.
I'm like, I've lost a bunch of mates, so I'm just like, I just can't be around. So funny. Oh man, people in the US, they have such funny interpretations of Australia. So no, but in all seriousness, Australia, it's a beautiful country, country, and it's so, there are gorgeous places all around the world, but Australia, particularly its beaches and its national parks are just second to none. If you look at it, Australia, geographically, it's the same size as the US, but the US, I think, has 360 million people, and Australia has 26 million people. So just like
so you got a little bit of room to spread out and have some fun when you go to the beach.
Fun and you just and there's not always someone looking over your shoulder. So it's Australia. It's a really special place.
Well, there you go. I'm going to have to let my wife know there's plenty of room on the beaches in Australia instead of heading down to Florida. Maybe we ought to just board a flight and head over there to get on the beach and spend some. I want to get out in the outback and just spend some time out there. I love nature, but I also love being around the rugged parts of nature. So jungles and deserts. And I've seen the pictures for years, for decades, and would love to get out there and spend some time out there.
Mate, do it. Highly recommend.
So let's go back now, because you're at this camp and it's something inside of you clicked, and you used this language a moment ago. You said, I think I found my purpose. Mm-hmm. Most guys at your age would not use that kind of language. In fact, guys that are 25, 35, 45 years old are still trying to figure out their purpose. So how did this click for you? Mm-hmm. What made you realize this is it?
There was very specifically, there was a moment when a facilitator, a guy named Robbo, he must have been about 28 years old. He was leading a resilience session that involved me standing at there was a bit of tape on the ground, and then there was Shakespearean poetry up on the projector.
All right.
And then a meter behind the tape was another bit of tape. And what you would do is you would step from the back line to the front line by yourself, and then you would need to bellow Shakespearean poetry as loud as you could. And if you made any mistake or fumbled at all, you would have to go back and step to the back of the line and then wait your turn to have another go. And I was there for about 2 hours. And I remember there was a moment when I was stood up to the line, I bellowed out Shakespeare. I had tears coming down my face because I was so like just confronted.
You were in it, right? You were in the moment?
In it. And I slipped on the last sentence, and Robbo, he came up and he got like down my face. I was 17 years old, and he goes, "Jamin, back to the line." And it was in this moment when I just like took the breath, and I'm like, actually, like winning actually doesn't matter, but it's about how I show up. And I got something inside of that moment that it's like, whoa. Yeah, like I continued, I'll always compete. I will always look to do my best. But at the end of the day, what's most important is how I show up. And so I went back to the line, and then 5 minutes later had another go and smashed it out. But something in me off the back of that experience, something shifted that was just like, whoa, like what that guy just facilitated for me. Because most people are going to be like, oh, you've done your best, buddy.
Yeah.
Like, you know, come on through. And it's like, but he like held me at that breaking point where it was like, I could have said F this and then been like, I'm out. And he held, and he trusted that there was something inside of me that could go deeper. And there was something like in that moment, I was like, whoa, what he just like held me in and created for me. I'm like, there is a whole world of skill. There's a whole world of discernment. There's a whole world of emotional astuteness and attunement and telepathy that comes with like what he just created. And I was like, I'm like, whatever that world is, I want more of that. And I want to be leading, I want to be leading people to be able to have these kinds of breakthroughs, you know, facilitated through whatever modality. But I was like, something about that just ignited me. And I was like, whoa, like who do I get to become and who do other people get to become when we step into these kinds of transformational containers and are held by highly skilled and professional people to take life and leadership to the next level.
What was his name again?
Robbo.
Robbo.
Robbo, golly, I wouldn't even.
Yeah, no. I'm listening to this story and I'm sitting there thinking to myself, first of all, bellowing out Shakespearean poetry at the top of my lungs would be a disaster for me. Yeah. But a guy who sees something in you and calls something out of you, a guy who basically holds you and pushes you to your best, that dude, his name ought to stick with you. Mm-hmm. Man, you just said something that was so powerful. I think I need you to say it again, but I also think I need you to explain it because people are right now driving and listening to this and it just went right over their head. Sure. You just said, as an ultra competitive guy born into an incredibly competitive family, don't eat fast enough, don't get seconds. You just said winning doesn't matter. And everybody who was listening should have done a double take. But it's what you said after that that really got my attention. So I need you to explain this sentence again. Winning doesn't matter, but what's really important, Jamin?
Is how we show up.
Yeah. Explain this for just a second. Because in the United States, as in Australia, we are obsessed with coming out on first place. And it even doesn't matter how you do it. We want the prize. We want the trophy. We want to stand on the platform at the end. Yeah. How you show up is not as important in many circles as winning or losing. Mm-hmm. So you got to explain this one to the listener right now.
For sure. Yeah, great. I'm very passionate about this because for me, it's not that winning isn't important or a focus.
Of course.
The distinction is it's about being committed but non-attached. And so from my like the way in which we engage in facilitating transformation, the mindset through which we come at this is it's about being committed to the outcome, committed to the win, but being inside the question, who do I need to be and how do I need to show up in order to create the result that I want? Now, if all we're ever focused on is the win, well then we can create winning results in many different ways and sometimes unethically. Sometimes we can take corners, cut corners, cheat, shortcut in order to get the win. But ultimately, when we don't operate inside our own personal integrity, in other words, when we're not showing up congruent with our deepest alignment, the result is actually just like, it's superfluous, it's ego. Whereas if we're cultivating the way in which we go about winning, that's where the greatest success in life comes from, because after we finish the Ironman or stand on top of the podium with the gold medal around our neck, we see this all the time. You know, people get the win and then they feel empty afterwards. It's because they haven't necessarily been cultivating character in the pursuit of like whatever victory looks like. And so from our standpoint, it really is about be clear on the target, get after it, but show up inside deepest integrity, be in touch with who you're committed to being as a human being and as a leader. Come from that place. Do that consistently over time. Sometimes we're going to win, sometimes we're not, but it's who we're being and what we embody and represent that's ultimately the greatest reflection of our success versus...
Man, there is a lot of power in what you're saying right now, because I know plenty of people, you do too, who have radically pursued the top, and they've done it at all costs. And as a result, they make it to the top, but then they find that it's shallow and it doesn't satisfy them up there. And maybe it's because some of those compromises that they made along the way. But you're saying, man, it's how you getting to the top is important. Don't ever say that it's not, but it's how you get to the top that really leaves you satisfied. It really leaves you looking in the mirror, proud of what's staring back at you instead of ashamed of yourself years later.
100%. I mean, exactly, Jeff, because it's also reflected in, it's the nature of even some of the people who we work with inside the Aligned Leadership Program inside Mountains and Marathons. They are typically people who have experienced a tremendous amount of success in a commercial sense, in a professional sense, but, other layers of their life don't necessarily feel fully aligned. An example of might be that it's like, I've reached the top of my corporate career, but I'm disconnected from my kids. My kids aren't talking to me, or my wife is like, we're on the ropes with our marriage. Our marriage is on the ropes, and it's just like, it's really the question of what is success? What is the truth of definition of success for people? And I think when people get beneath the story that is sold of like success, like climbing the ladder and getting to a particular top or having a particular house and the white picket fence, I think there are definitions of success that are deeper than that for people. And when we can actually get in touch with what ultimate success looks like, and then orient our lives and our mindsets, our ways of being, our skill sets, life systems and structures to be congruent with the deeper definition of success, so much more fulfillment, happiness, and so much less drama is possible for people when they choose to live congruent with a new definition.
I did not expect this interview to go this way, man, but I want to camp on this thing for just a second, because what you're saying is really, really important. If you got the kids pulling for your attention right now and you're listening to this podcast, I need you to pause it and wait for a moment that you can focus. Or if you're driving in heavy traffic right now, maybe you just need to hang on and listen to what you're hearing from Jamin, because he is killing it right now. When we start talking about success, the bottom line is, everybody is going to have to sacrifice to make it to the next level. You don't make it to the top without making some sacrifices. But I just heard you say, you didn't use these words, Jamin, but I heard you say, be careful the sacrifices that you're making. Don't sacrifice what's really important. Don't sacrifice who you are or the people that you love to get to the top, because that will leave you with less than success. That will not fill you up. And success is not just reaching the top. Success is being satisfied at the top. Just making it to the top is not success. And that's the myth that media is throwing our way, right? Like when you're at the top, you're the big man, big woman. Everybody has to look up to you. Now you're a success. Well, not if you just sacrificed everything that's important in the world to get there. That isn't successful. In fact, what that leaves you feeling like is a miserable failure while you're at the top. So, man, I need you to camp on this one for just a little bit longer with the listeners, because I want them to really understand what success feels like and how shallow it can be at the top.
Sure, man. Yeah, we can go there. I mean, even if we look at it, just even the nature of like, you look at today's contemporary, like young people growing up, like, man, so many kids just want to be YouTube sensations.
They want to be
like
internet influencers.
Instant influencers, Insta famous. And it's like, it's founded upon such surface, superficial values. Now, I don't blame the kids for this. Like, culturally, that's what's been perpetuated.
Of course, yeah.
But it demands like life, like fulfilling, satiating, rich, juicy life demands a deeper inquiry into values beneath these surface, superficial values. And so, you know, for those people who are like hell bent on the corporate progression and the career, like the career climb, it really is a worthy inquiry of going, well, A, what sacrifices am I making? Like, what is getting like the second.
What Jamin is telling you is you need to ask yourself this question along the way. And that's really good advice, man. Sorry to interrupt you. Keep going.
Not at all. So that's a key part of it. And the other question is like, where does this come from? Like, why?
Why do I need that so bad, right?
Why is reaching the top so important to me? And typically, if we do a healthy level of vulnerable excavation, it's going to stem from some kind of unfulfilled childhood needs, where love was only given when we were the winner.
You performed at the top.
Dad only gave me the pat on the back and said, I love you when you won the 800-meter race when you were 7 years old. It's really looking at going, well, okay, then, is my way of being in life an authentic expression of who I actually am? Or is it just a default reaction to a whole bunch of childhood programming of where I didn't get my needs met as a kid? And this it's a very simple example that I'm giving, but that principle plays out in so many different ways.
Man.
Be that career trajectory, be that who we seek as our lifelong partner, like the mother of our children, or whatever it be, our relationship with money, with abundance, for having no money, like so much of it stems from the baseline unconscious programming that shows up from our primary caregivers from when we're a kid. Carry on.
Totally agree. 0% of our listeners are teenage girls, but as you're talking, I'm thinking there's this 17-year-old teenage girl out there. She desperately wants to be a social media influencer, and everything that she's saying is you got to take your clothes off, and you got to take more clothes off, and you got to keep taking clothes off. And so eventually she's going to compromise what's really, really important to try to get to that level of social media influencer by taking her clothes off, because that's what the entire industry is challenging her to do.
Yep.
And what you're hearing today from Jamin is it's not worth it. Even if you were to make it to the top, you're going to end up there and realize none of it was worth it, which is miserable to compromise who you are and what you really stand for, and then get up to the top and realize it wasn't worth it in the first place. Like, that's a bad place to be.
For sure. And look, and this is I think it's really important though not to dismantle the value of getting to the top. But the question is how you get there to the top? Because again, I've had coaching clients in the past who have been social media influencers, and the reason why I'm working with them is because they feel empty, and they're at a stage where they want to transition from being like the travel vlogger to actually like coaching people to create more meaningful lives, because they've realized that there's a lack of fulfillment in what they're currently doing, even though it would appear as though they've reached the top. And so what I do then is, I meet them in this place of unfulfillment where they're connected to a more meaningful career and existence. And then they grapple with this like transition of they start to shift how they be and how they show up in social media, and then they start losing followers, and so then there's this whole part of their ego that needs to be navigating. Like, whoa, okay, the crowd doesn't seem to be liking this, but who I was when I got the crowd isn't who I actually am.
I am now. Yeah.
And so then there's this mammoth egoic conflict that takes place, and so it creates because how they got to the top, whatever that means, isn't an authentic expression of who they really are, or perhaps there's been a transformation of who they are to who they are now, that all of that doesn't lead to a place of deep fulfillment and satisfaction when we get to the top. So go on.
Go for it, man. Keep going.
So from my standpoint, it's like, pursue the top. be clear on the bigger picture vision and
go for it.
Go for it. But just be really in tune with like, what are my core values? What is most important? And how do I lead an aligned, holistic life that is structured in such a way that enables me to get after it, whilst also being responsible and accountable to all of these other layers of life that are important at the same time as the pursuit of excellence.
And for the listener right now, you can hear that Jamin is speaking to everybody. He's not just talking to the corporate executive, the high power leader out there. He's talking to the stay-at-home mom. He's talking to the guy who's coaching a basketball team, a little rec league sport. Like, it's all of us. You have to decide, what am I not willing to sacrifice? What are my values, and what do I hold most important that I'm not willing to sacrifice? And if it requires sacrificing that, then I'm just not going to get to the top. But if I can find a way to the top without sacrificing that, I'm going for it, because getting to the top it feels really good when you do it and you do it the right way. Hey, we've got a sponsor, Jamin. I want to introduce you to him. But for the whole listening audience, this is the last episode that the guys from Go Ministries is sponsoring. And I just wanted to say thank you to Will Pardon and the team. This is my first real sponsor. Here's a little inside information about this podcast. It loses money every episode. I'm paying for this thing out of my pocket. And when Go Ministries came along, these guys said, hey, Jeff, we'll help you a little bit. Even with Go Ministries, I'm still losing money on every episode, but I love these conversations, and I love bringing people like Jamin on the air, on YouTube, and on all of the podcast platforms. So Jamin, I want you to hear this really short 1 minute and 30-second explanation about who Go Ministries is. And then when we come back, I want people to hear your success in business, and then you pivot and turn that success in business into creating successful leaders with mountains and marathons. But check out this spot from Go Ministries.
Hi, my name is Will Parton. I'm the president of Go Ministries. Go Ministries empowers local leaders to make disciples. Over the past 30 years, I've seen our ministry go from one family, one church, and one school to over 300 local leaders making disciples in 150 different communities through church planting, sports, and medical. And we're getting ready to expand into other countries. The way that we define a disciple-making culture is when mentorship, mission, and multiplication are present. When there's that one-on-one mentorship between two people that are sharing the gospel, we believe that discipleship is taking place. And then when a group of people are gathering together and they're on mission together, serving their community that surrounds them, that's another part of discipleship. And then lastly, you can't be a disciple or disciple maker if multiplication isn't the final goal. So would you please join us in our disciple-making movement and our disciple-making culture by going to gomen.org.
Hey, Jamin, you are not just talking about this like reading it in a book. It's not theory for you. You've done this, man. You bought and sold companies. You started companies. Describe a little bit about your success in the business world, starting companies, selling companies, before we get into being highly successful in an incredibly competitive arena. And about mountains and marathons. But let's talk a little bit about your success in business before we get there.
Nice. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks for that beautiful reintroduction. Yeah, so early days, early 20s, my primary work was centered around building nonprofit initiatives that was focused on leadership development for young people. So the catalyst from that leadership development program I experienced when I was 17 years old, that was when I got the vision for creating my first organization called Game Changers, which was really looking at how sport could be an agent for social change in grassroots sporting communities in Australia.
So sport is the game in Game Changers, is what you're saying.
That's right, exactly. So that was the essence of it. And so back then we used to run a program called Captain's Camp, and we'd work with 16 to 18-year-old young leaders from grassroots sport across 6-month transformational leadership programs, really an extension of what I'd experienced when I was 17 years old. So I founded Game Changers when I was 22 years old. That continued to live on for another 8 years until COVID interfered with its career trajectory, which, as it did for many other small nonprofits. But one of the most profound spin-offs or creations that came from the beginnings of Game Changers was an organization called the Man Cave. So when I was 24, I partnered with one of my best friends, a guy named Hunter Johnson, and the two of us formed a nonprofit called the Man Cave, where we would go into schools and work with year 7 to year 12 boys around challenging, deconstructing, redefining masculinity, and being important educational conversations around gender equality, emotional intelligence, suicide prevention,
wow.
all of the key conversations that schools were trying to have but not doing effectively. And so through the Man Cave, we started to do really profound work and started to get recognized quite, I guess, influentially by a number of leaders and philanthropic leaders within Australia. So we started to receive a significant amount of funding to continue to grow and scale the work of the Man Cave. And I left the work of the Man Cave to actually start Mountains and Marathons 5 years ago. However, it still remains, almost 10 years later, it's one of the fastest growing nonprofits. It's worked with 40,000 boys around Australia, and now has a facilitation team of 40, and they've scaled across multiple states throughout Australia. And they are really leading the charge of promoting a movement of healthy masculinity within Australia. So this was an organization that I co-created with Hunter back in the day. To help fund the organization, we co-created a young men's hygiene company called Stuff, which sells
Stuff.
It's called Stuff. So stuff for your face, stuff for your pits, and it's deodorant, sunscreen, toothpaste, like just all the needs for
all
boys
the stuff that somebody needs. Yeah,
correct. Yep, exactly. And so the reason I share that is because I'm very passionate about business that does good. And so the creation of Stuff as a for-profit company, 50% of the profits of Stuff go back to funding boys to be able to participate in the Man Cave programs. And so there's a whole closed loop around the positive messaging that comes with facilitating transformation. So that's a couple of the, I guess, the baseline successes. I mean, I ran a fitness company called Back to School Fitness. It did fairly well. We tried to franchise. That didn't work. And so gave that a crack whilst we were concurrently building Game Changers. And, I ran a coaching practice when I was like 20 years old, and again, had to go, failed. But again, the thing that's consistent about me is the consistency of showing up, having a go, and learning from mistakes. I haven't been necessarily the biggest book nerd, but I'm certainly one that can take principle, apply it, and then have it move from knowledge into wisdom, which comes from experience.
Sure. I'm glad you mentioned that not all of your startups were successful. And I think that's important, because sometimes the most powerful lessons are those failures where I just figured a few things out. I had to figure them out the hard way. I failed and it hurt really bad. But now that I figured those things out, I can take those lessons and be much more successful going down the road. Hey man, I am an avid runner and I love the mountains. So when you put these two words together, I perked up right away. Like, wait a second, somebody's doing marathons and mountains. I've been a marathon runner for about 30 years. And by the way, you've got me by one continent. So I have run marathons on 5 continents. My goal is to run all 7, meaning my goal is to run the Antarctica Marathon one day. But that one's a stretch, just getting there, getting on the course and, running that thing in the snow. So tell me a little bit about your background that you decided I'm going to put 2 things together and turn them into and help turn out leaders. Tell me about the time that you spent on Kilimanjaro and Everest and some of the peaks of the world, and some of the marathons that you've run on 6 continents around the world.
Nice, cool. So I think to share this story, Jeff, I'll zoom back, because there was the creation of Game Changers, the Man Cave, my fitness company, my speaking career, etc. And all of this led to me being 26 years old and, believe it or not, absolutely miserable. And
there it is. He's making money. He's very influential and miserable, which means not successful.
Not successful, living deeply misaligned, but I was receiving so much social validation for being, a positive role model and the difference that I was making to people's lives, that, that validation piece that I continued to get, which again is a shadow from childhood, was keeping me stuck inside of overworking. And eventually I just got to the place where I was feeling, I was burnt out, I was resentful, I was starting to experience high levels of stress and anxiety, depression. And I remember so clearly, it was the 19th of July, 2016. head in my hands, bawling my eyes out, having a mammoth breakdown. And after about 2 hours of letting it go and feeling real sorry for myself and my circumstance, I had a simple but profound epiphany. I realized that I created this mess. Like
You created that mess.
all of my suffering, right?
Glad to hear you say that out loud, right? Not somebody else's fault. I did this to me.
I did this to me. And so then I was like, well, okay, if I created this, then I can create my way out of it. So in that moment, I just asked myself the question. I was like, okay, cool, blank canvas. If I could actually create life exactly as I would love for it to be, and do what I really want to do, what would I actually create? And then it hit me in an instant. I was like, I'd be running marathons, climbing mountains, traveling the world, transforming my life, and working out some way to help other people do the same. And so it was literally that night. I spent 3 hours downloading the vision. The next day I got up, I phoned my business partners, my parents, my closest friends, and I said, hey guys, listen, this is where I'm at. In 2 years, I'm heading off on a one-way flight somewhere overseas, and I'm on a mission.
Did you actually use a timeline? I'm going to do this in 2 years?
In 2 years, yeah. I had this like intuitive hit that it was like, it's going to take me about 2 years to exit out of what I'm currently doing.
Yeah.
Sell businesses, hand over leadership, etc. And then actually get to a place where I can be physically able to run a marathon, because I never ran a marathon before.
For real?
Yeah, no, I'd never ran a marathon. I was just like, listen, I was just in a place where I was like, there was the hypothesis of, in order to fulfill on running a marathon and climbing a mountain on every continent and build a business that can help fund inevitable international adventure around the world, a transformation is going to be necessary. It's like,
I'm going to have to figure out how to run a marathon.
I'm going to have to figure out how to run a marathon. I'm going to have to figure out how to build this business. Like, I'm like, who I am on the other side of this is someone who I am inspired to be, because I'm not that human.
I love this story.
Well, I'm not just yet. And so so then I declared it. I declared it to my closest 10 people and said, guys, in 2 years I'm off. And so thereafter, the becoming of Mountains and Marathons was a series of profound synchronicities. And one of those was meeting Jen, my business partner, 6 months later. So we actually started out in the context of a romantic relationship. And then she supported me and nursed me through healing from burnout. And then once I came back to a place of personal power, the two of us put our collective experience. Jenny had a background in international business of coaching and also helping entrepreneurs like me, so people up to stuff but burning out. And so the two of us then put our years of experience together to create the foundations of Mountains and Marathons and create the very first edition of the Aligned Leadership Program, which was centered around running a marathon in Patagonia back in September of 2018. And so I remember it so clearly. It was November of 2017. I got home after a busy day of work, and Jen had put up butcher's papers all around the living room. And on each one it said, it had like mountains, and then it had marathons, and then it had leadership program. And she invited me into just this entire evening of ideation around, okay, we've been talking about this long enough. What are we actually going to do? And so we started to list down like all the mountains we wanted to climb, all the marathons we wanted to run, the countries we wanted to visit, and then some of the key pillars and themes that we would integrate into the very first edition of the Aligned Leadership Program. Now, the beauty off the back of that was like, I mean, so much of what we wrote down there never happened. Right. But it had an energy behind it that allowed for us to actually start to bring material form to this thing that we'd been conspiring for about 8 months. And so, then it was in April of 2018, we started our very first Aligned Leadership Program. We had 3 members say yes. It's a 6-month journey, a holistic journey of leadership growth and transformation that integrates individual coaching, group coaching, fitness coaching, and nutrition coaching, and then graduates with a running a marathon or climbing a mountain in some epic location around the world. And so in essence, we're now up to our 15th edition of the Aligned Leadership Program, where we've ran marathons in Patagonia and Cape Town, South Africa, Honolulu, San Francisco. They're the prime. I think there's a couple of other marathons in there as well. But then we've also ran climb Mt Kilimanjaro. I've done 5 editions of Mt Kilimanjaro in Tanzania. We've done Everest Base Camp twice. We ran a level 2 called Masterpiece in Iceland. So it truly has become a full-on aligned, embodied lifestyle where we live, breathe, walk and talk what it means to live in alignment. And then we coach that through our 6-month transformational leadership program, Align. And then it funds our adventures, as well as obviously brings our members to come and have transformational experiences where they put themselves to the test by running marathons and climbing mountains in epic parts of the world.
You said right before we started recording today that you're on this little 9-day break, but you pretty much live on the road. And if you have that kind of industry, if you have that kind of business, you're going to spend a lot of time traveling, which I know it takes a toll on you. But I'm really, really inspired by not just the concept of mountains and marathons, but the fact that you could pull this off in a super competitive industry. Almost everybody that I know who considers themselves a pretty talented leader says, I think I'm going to just start a leadership consulting business. And then every one of them struggle because I don't think people realize just how saturated that market is.
Yep.
But man, you've been very successful in this industry. How did you pull off that kind of success in a oversaturated leadership consultant industry?
Well, first of all, thank you for the acknowledgement. And yeah, it is a saturated industry. Like everyone is calling themselves a coach these days. And
Yeah,
so,
sure.
And it's honestly, it's one of the lowest barrier industries in the world because anyone can literally call
Yeah,
themselves a coach.
basically anybody who thinks they know something can start or can get into it.
That's right. That's right. So, look, I think there's a few things that distinguish us that I certainly attribute to a foundation of the part of the foundation of our success. One part is Jenny and I are very good at what we do. So that is a baseline, and this industry is relationships first, and we're really good at fostering authentic foundations of relationship and demonstrate that we care so much and that we have skill that can serve and support. So I think that as a baseline is really important for anyone who's looking to build a successful coaching practice. The second piece, though, that I think really has supported a key part of our success is we have a really clear and distinct point of difference. So we marry, we have a very specific niche in the sense that we're seeking those people who are inspired by having a life transformation whilst and taking their life and leadership to the next level in whatever that looks like, married with that spirit of adventure that potentially has not been ignited for a long time. And so when you bring these two together, which marries the passion for adventure and international travel and physical challenge, combined with this desire to personally grow, to develop, to mature, to evolve, bringing these two niche ideas together and marrying them in one program seems to speak to people in a way that many other leadership programs or coaching programs don't. And so I think being good at what we do, married with this distinct point of difference, and then obviously setting up the right marketing and sales journeys combined to create, I believe, what has become the foundation of a successful coaching business that we run.
And obviously you get Fortune 500 CEOs, you get ex-military, you get some pretty high capacity leaders going through your program. But one of the things I really like about what you're doing is it's not built just for them. You got stay-at-home moms. You got the average everyday person who's looking at their life and saying, I think I want to be able to challenge myself. I think I want to try something. And then they hear about mountains and marathons, and all of a sudden you give them the opportunity to try something that they may never attempt on their own. And you give them a safety net to try it with, which is a really beautiful thing for somebody who's saying, I wish I could break out of the rut, but I don't know how. Maybe what they need to do is reach out to mountains and marathons and see when you're doing your next, your next event.
For sure, man. Yeah. Well, we would welcome any of your listeners to check us out and take a look at the Align Leadership Program. But that's the heart of it, man, is we believe in a world where everyone has the opportunity to live in deep alignment, live in deep congruence with their truth. And so, yes, we do work with some incredibly successful, high-level entrepreneurs and executives. And yes, we also work with people who are, who as you said, stay-at-home mums or people who have, potentially sold a business and now questioning, what am I doing? Cool, I've done that bit, but now what am I doing with the rest of my life? And so, because living aligned, it is not exclusive to those who are just performing at the top of their game right now. It really is a conversation for everyone to be in. And the beauty is, man, is it's regardless of someone's title and their sense of identity, everyone is navigating real life stuff behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And I think that, and that really is the great equalizer when you bring our groups of people together, is it's like there's such a diverse range of high performing people and different, impressive titles and whatnot. But when we get beneath the titles and actually get in touch with the human being that is showing up on the Zoom screen, we discover that there is a whole bunch of beautifully vulnerable layers of life that exist inside each person. And, that's the spirit of Align, is it's not just about how we lead other people. It's really about how we're leading ourselves more effectively so that we're able to show up and create a life that we're really inspired by.
I've been able to run a couple of marathons with friends or family members who have never tried it before, but they wanted to give it a try. And so they said, hey, Jeff, would you run with me? Would you help coach me? I'm not a running coach, but I've done lots of marathons, ultra marathons. And I tell them all, yeah, I'm willing to do this thing with you. You have to put the work in. I'll help you as you put the work in. But you need to know something. When we start this thing together, we are going to finish. And I said to my sister on her first marathon, if I have to drag you by your hair across the finish line, we are going to finish this thing together. And then just seeing the joy and the sense of accomplishment when they step across the finish line of a marathon, it's priceless, because I know what that feels like, but they've just never experienced it before. That's one of those things people will look back for the rest of their life and said, man, if I can run a marathon, then I can handle what's happening to my family or what's happening in my business. And man, I can already feel how powerful mountains and marathons are in leaders, shaping leaders, molding them to the next level.
Beautiful. Thanks, man. You get it. You get it. And it truly is because the question is, it's not so much about the transformation that happens during the marathon, but it's who you become in the preparation. It's
absolutely.
When I meet our clients at the beginning of the race, when we're about to effectively do the graduation, do the final exam, it's like I'll say, how you feeling? I'll be like, Jamin, I've already ran my marathon, and that'll be all the work they've done inside the leadership, coaching, and the preparation. And they're just like, today's the celebration. It's like, awesome. Get out there, work hard, have fun. But that's the spirit, it's about being able to show up at the start line, knowing that you've earned the right to get out there and give it your best shot. Yeah.
Well, here's how I want to wrap this episode up, Jamin. I did an interview more than a year ago with a lady who is an extremely successful, very, very accomplished chef, and her life was miserable because of all of the pressure that goes along with it. She started restaurants, has the Michelin stars to back it up, and she just decided, you know what? I'm done with this lifestyle. I'm going to pivot. And what was powerful about that episode, and you just said it in this one as well, is that she made the courageous decision to leave all of that stuff behind and go pursue a dream that if I could do this, I think I could really, really enjoy myself for the rest of my life. So there are people that are listening right now that are where you were 2 years before starting Mountains and Marathons, when you were really struggling. You were stressed out, you were burned out, and you were saying, I don't like who I've become. I'm getting all of the accolades and all of the affirmation, but I don't like what it takes to get here or to stay here. And if I could follow my dream, here's what I would do next. But they're right at this edge and they're asking the question, am I really willing to leave it all and go pursue that dream? So what I'd like for you to do is just kind of wrap this episode up by talking to that person who's on the edge and they're saying, man, I've got a lot to lose if I do this. Am I really willing to go out and to start something like you and Jen when you started Mountains and Marathons? What would you say to that person?
Well, first of all, I would want a little more context about their life circumstance, because there are just certain layers of life that it's just important. It's like really being in tune with what are the deepest layers of responsibility that I have, and then ultimately what is my most aligned life. Because it is easy to go, I'd love the travel lifestyle and I'd love to, have all of this freedom, but when our deepest commitment is to be the best possible father that we can be, maybe leaving the wife and kids, and, starting the business in Cambodia isn't the thing that's going to actually bring the deepest level of fulfillment possible. So contextually, that's just an important thing to acknowledge.
Sure.
But first of all, what I would say to begin with is write it down. Write down the vision. Write down.
Okay. Write it down. I'm writing down. Write it down right now.
Write down the depth of clarity that you have around what the most deeply aligned life and vision is for you. then from that place, there are two ways you can go. You can go the courageous all-in approach, which I'm certainly not opposed to that. That's typically my approach, is just like the dive head first.
Mine too.
One I would say though is make sure that you've got guidance, have professional guidance, and surround yourself with people who have made the jump before and know what they're doing. So I'm a big proponent of people getting coaches who have treading the path before and know how to support people in those major transitions and evolutions, because it can be absolutely terrifying, not just when the jump is made, but then also in the moments of vulnerability afterwards as well. So definitely encourage professional guidance and support, and also community is a huge part to support this kind of major transition. The alternative.
And when you say community, describe that for just a second for the person that isn't sure what you're saying.
Yeah, nice. I mean, just Mountains Marathons is probably a good example. It's like the nature of our programs. We bring, between 9 and 15 people together for a program, and everyone is in some kind of similar stage of transition of life. So being able to go through by saying yes to a big picture vision and a big life evolution, and being able to share that transition and source inspiration and support from others who are going through something similar, that taps into something quite spiritually profound inside the human experience, is being able to be immersed in the energy and support of community and other people.
Sure.
So that's what I mean by that, versus surrounding yourself with the people that are like, hey, you shouldn't do that, be careful.
Yeah, that's right. The negative voices.
The negative voices. And it's just and sure, they've got best interests at heart. That's fine. Their intentions are pure. It just doesn't empower the fulfillment of what it is that you really want to create in life. So being intentional about creating community of those who are going to be supportive of the fulfillment of the vision is really, really key. So that's the first trajectory. The other one is to be more of the part-time approach of looking at, okay, I have a baseline of responsibility here. I can't just let it all go and just go hell with it and step fully in head first. But there are certainly ways and means in which we can steadily turn the Titanic, and make it and bring our life into deeper levels of alignment without necessarily having to make massive, drastic changes.
Yeah, all at once.
All at once, exactly. Now, having said this, typically for those who are experiencing a level of stuckness or burnout that may be due to being overworked, knowing that you're in the wrong career, knowing that you're in the wrong relationship, sometimes we just know these things.
Yeah.
Turning the Titanic slowly, that doesn't work. There does need to be a jump at some point in time.
Yeah.
And though it is important to be responsible about the way in which we go, again, how we get the result, the way in which we show up and navigate these massive transitions in life, it is important to be, it does demand courage, and it will be vulnerable, but there are more effective and less effective ways of doing that. And so again, I'm a proponent of having coaches who can support and guide and hold the emotional fragility and turmoil that can come with all the layers of making these major life changes, which, that's obviously something I'm sure you have experience in, and that's something that we do a lot of inside the Aligned Leadership Program.
Well, you're coaching people right now, and I know that there's some listeners that are hearing this and they're like, man, I like what I'm hearing from this guy. I'm really, really interested in mountains and marathons, and they're trying to figure out how do they get in touch with you, or how do they learn more about mountains and marathons? Where do they go? How do they find out more?
Beautiful. Thanks, Jeff. Yeah. So baseline, all the baselines, guys. So Mountains and Marathons, the website. So that's www.mountainsmarathons.world. You can follow us on Instagram. So that's @Mountains and Marathons. You can follow me personally on Instagram. So that's @Jamin Heppell. And then you can also, everyone is welcome to join our free online Facebook community, which is where Jen and I are constantly giving free guidance on simple distinctions, leadership distinctions to support you to bring your life into deeper alignment. And that happens through our free Facebook community called Living Aligned by Mountains and Marathons. And you can search us on Facebook and request to join that group, as we'd love to see you there.
I'm going to put links to all of these, your social media, Mountains and Marathons website, the Facebook group, all of that in the notes to this episode. But man, I could seriously talk for hours with you, because you've got my two passions right here, and you get a chance to do those every day, all day long, man. I'm thinking I could do I could do what this guy does for the rest of my life and be very satisfied, feel very successful, man. So thank you for taking some time, taking a break while you're traveling through Mexico and coming on this episode of Unbeatable with me.
So good, Jeff. I've had an absolute ball. You're an incredible host, man. I can feel the resonance of the passion and love the way in which you're contributing to people's lives through this podcast. So thank you for allowing me to be here and having me share in a way that's felt really energy giving to my day.
All right, man. Well, enjoy the rest of your break before you get back out there and do more mountains or climb more mountains and do more marathons.
Good man. Thanks so much.
As Jamin was talking, I was thinking about this episode that I did more than a year ago with Diana Gramillion, who was an extremely successful chef, and all of the pressure and all of the stress that goes along with running restaurants and earning Michelin stars. She threw it all away and decided to pursue a life that she really wants. If you want to get a chance, go back and check out my episode of Unbeatable with Diana Gramillion. But I wrote down this advice that Jamin gave us today. Let's say that there is a dream and you really, really want to chase that dream, but you're stuck in this dead-end job or you're stuck under the stress of a world that you don't want to be in anymore. Well, here's his recipe. First, write it down. Secondly, build a community around you of people that are in that arena. Third, make sure that you've got a coach that can help you figure out how to go from where you are to where you want to be. But I love how he says it. Ultimately, at some point, you just got to go for it. And I hope as you were listening, if there's a dream on your list, if you got something on your bucket list that you've always wanted to do, well, write it down, build a community, find a coach, and then go for it. I hope you were excited, as informed and excited about this episode as I was. And I just want to thank you. You know, we created a free resource for people that are stuck. We give it away to anybody who wants it. All you got to do to get what I call my Unbeatable Army Survival Guide, this free PDF download, is just go to the unbeatablearmy.com. And for all of the amazing listeners out there, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for tuning in and week out into this episode. But the listener of the week, the fan of the week for this week is Bobby Mason. And Bobby, I just want to say you're awesome. You're so awesome that we want everybody to know you're awesome by calling you our fan of the week. So thanks for being tuned in. If you stumbled across us and you want to know more, why don't you go ahead and subscribe to this on your favorite social media platform? Just search at Unbeatable Podcast. And if you haven't already fallen in love with it, why don't you go ahead and start subscribing on your favorite podcast platform or subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we'll bring you more amazing guests like this every week. Thanks for joining us. I hope you have a great week. Go out and live your dreams this week. See you next time.